Alrighty, well, thank you all for being here today for our fourth session of the Virtual Entrepreneurship Toolkit series. For those of you that don't know me yet, my name is Cameron Law, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I'm joined by one of our entrepreneurs in residence, Dr. Brian Gladden. If you're not familiar with the Carlson Center, we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable you as a startup founder to get the skills and tools you need in order to start and scale your venture. Our mission is to make innovation and entrepreneurship pervasive throughout the greater Sacramento region. And we're really working towards realizing this vision of being a premier hub of innovation and entrepreneurship across the nation. And so how we work with you along the entrepreneurial journey, obviously you're here as part of that with the Virtual Entrepreneurship Toolkit series, but we also have two other areas of support, which are called our Discover, Build, and Launch programs. Our Toolkit series falls under the Build, where we're really giving you the tools, frameworks, and skills to turn your idea into a business model, and then hopefully turn that into bringing it to market. Tonight's session, which is the fourth of our fifth, if you're joining us just for this session or have missed some in the past, hopefully you can get connected to some of those recordings. But we also tonight are going to be tackling the topics of revenue streams, cost structures, the offer, and financial projections. And to support us with financial projections, we have Roger Godfrey, who's the SVP and Senior Relationship Manager at the California Bank of Commerce. So we're really excited to have him join us and walk us through the financial projections. And before I pass it over to Brian, just a little bit of housekeeping. Again, we'd love for you to have your video on if possible. We understand if you're not able to, but we'd love to see your faces. And then also, if you could remain muted unless you're called upon during the presentation portion, just makes for a better recording for you when you're going back over the content later. And the last thing is feel free to ask any questions related to the topics that we're sharing. You can use the raise hand feature as well as throw your questions into the chat. We will also periodically take pauses and ask for questions to unmute, so don't hesitate to do so. And one of the things I love about our cohort here or our group here, we do have people from around the world, so feel free to share where you're joining us from. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Brian and we'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Cameron. Let me share and we can get going. All right, welcome back, everybody. Looks like we have a lot of repeat offenders, so thanks for staying with us over the 4 weeks so far, and hopefully you join us next week, which is probably the big week because you have a panel of folks that you get to talk to on investors and do's and don'ts and pitching, so that's always a really good one. And I'm really excited that Roger's here again with us today. To me, that's the most important part of this week's session is Roger's part, so I'm going to try and get through the first section here of revenue costs, offer, MVP in about 45 minutes. We want to spend at least an hour on the financial projections. That's always, to me, the hardest thing. People have the most questions, how do you do it, make it look pretty? So we're going to do those things like we did last time, some simple case studies and simple graphs you guys can use. Let me get my little annotation tool so you can see my spotlight. There we go. So last week, if you're with us, we covered several areas. We covered go-to-market strategy, which really encompassed channels, your partners, customer relationships, how you stay in touch with them, you get them, you keep them, you grow them. These are things, obviously, that the investor stakeholders are going to want to know. We also talked about ideation, right, from the solution standpoint. So you've discovered insights in a customer problem. Now, how do we ideate around the solution? You might have a notion, but actually getting more concrete information, what that either device or product or service looks like. And so we talked about brainstorming as well as reverse assumptions, if you remember that, ways to think outside the box, be disruptive, be very creative. And then we looked at traction modeling, the concept, if you remember, called the customer factory, where we really looked at a prospect going through almost like a funnel as a factory, right? inputs as a prospect. Did they sign up? Did they actually pay you? Did they refer you? Did they cancel? How long did they stay with you? And really looking at your customer as a factory and showing traction along the way. One of those is revenue, but also people using it, downloading your app as an example, right? So we want to show traction to our investors and stakeholders. And to do that, we looked at metrics. Remember the pirate metrics, acquisition, activation, referral, retention, revenue, and the traction roadmap that goes with that, that actually is that real-time graph that you can use that's much more hands-on and real world for an investor versus just saying, I'm going to get 10% of market share. Much more detail behind it. And we start with that minimum success criteria, right? Why are you even doing this venture? What is minimum success to you look like? $1 million, 10 million, 1,000? And if you don't have that, then what's the point? Because you're going forward with no end in mind, right? We have to understand, how we can monetize something, how many customers that would take, how long it would take to get there. And then to help us do that, to validate both our insights as well as our solution, we talked about how can you create lean experiments, which we call lean sprints, right? 2-week time cycles to get feedback, validate, reiterate, pivot, pause, whatever we need to do, which will reduce your risk. That's your number one goal as your entrepreneur. How do I reduce my risk? I'm going to be successful, right? And uncertainty. So this week is revenue and costs, which are really a part of our lean canvas. We're going to go through that. And then the offer and MVP, and then we'll get into the financial projections. And then next week, tying it together, the deck, the pitching, and then things like your unfair advantage and accomplishments and funding needs with the panel. So when we look at the lean canvas, we've done most of these already. The only one we haven't is unfair advantage next week. But this week, we did metrics last week, so I'll take that off. But cost structure and revenues. And really, we're just going to talk about these at a high level to set the stage for Roger to really get into the details, cost of acquisition, lifetime values of customers, these sort of things, margins, your burn rate. So we're just going to touch on these. So at least at a high level what the lean canvas talks about, what goes in here, very simple stuff. So when we think about revenue from the lean canvas perspective, you're really looking at high level, how do I monetize this new offering, this thing I'm trying to get to market? Is it a transaction or is it a recurring fee, right? So at a very basic level on a type of revenue stream, how am I generating revenue? Is it like monthly subscription or like recurring, or is the transaction? I bought a bottle of water, right? That's a point transaction. And then we can look at examples. So what are some examples of things like this? Well, you're selling an asset, right? You sold something, whether it's a car, a device, right? That's an asset sale. Very simple. That's probably what the majority are. Then you have usage fees, which now with technology and some of these other ones are becoming more common, where it's you're using something, whether it's how much time you use. It could be a cell phone, right? As an example. Subscription fees. We all know magazines, gyms, everything else. And then you have things like lending or renting or leasing. So from a financial perspective, maybe you're creating a new mortgage company, leasing company. So, or property management, where you're getting some of these things, or it could be a brokerage fee like a property company, or a brokerage fee as a credit card company, a real estate agent. So that's how you make money there. And then licensing. Maybe it's intellectual property. Maybe you've created something, but you don't want to have to worry about getting it to market, so you've got to a distributor, right? And you've licensed it to them to sell. And then advertising, which is a little bit unique, right? You have space, maybe you own billboards and you're basically making a revenue stream off selling that space for advertising. Could be even digitized now, right? A Google ad or something like that. That's how they do it. So these are all different examples of ways you can monetize transaction or recurring revenue streams. Just a quick example. So here is our business model canvas. And this is an example of Nespresso. So Nestle, who owns the Nespresso machines, when they first came out, they were looking at selling the machine itself. So the machine itself would be an asset, right? I bought this thing, whatever, $200. and they were selling it to households and offices, and they had a one-time sale of that machine. They evolved their business model over time, which you can do too. So when we talk about how do we innovate, every one of these 9 elements is an area you can look at. Say, okay, we have a one-time sale. How about doing a reoccurring revenue? How could we do that? What could that look like? Well, the pods that go into that device, they then started selling both in retail and online. So now you have repetitive pod sales, recurring revenue streams. So now you have 2 different revenue streams, and those could be sold in stores, online, mail order. Usually the machine itself, historically had been retail only, brick and mortar, right? Fry's, Best Buy, Target, Walmart. Now you can probably order through Amazon as well. So that's just a way to think about more than one revenue stream and innovating and evolving your business model over time once you get traction. So when we think about pricing mechanisms, we think about first fixed price. What is my price of this device, of this service, list price, just like you buy most things. But what about things that are feature dependent? Maybe it is like Zoom. How many bells and whistles, how much storage do I want to have? How many users do I want to have? Do I want to be able to record this, right? So the more features you add in a lot of things, the more cost goes up. Do you have something like that, right? Are you just building one thing, or do you have add-ons of different features that you want to sell with it? Maybe it's segment dependent. And a good example here is, are you selling into the public sector, city, state, government, federal, or normal commercial markets, private sector? If you sell into the public sector, much of the time you have to sell to them at the lowest price you're selling it to anybody else in the world. That's called favored nation status. So if you sell to the US government, they're going to put a clause on there that says you can't sell anything to anybody lower than you give it to us for. So you need to understand that. You could have them as the lowest price and everything else in the commercial market is higher. That's totally legit, and that's what most people do, because the scale of economy is the scale of the government so large. Selling to the state of California, you're going to buy millions and millions of stuff versus just dozens of things. Volume dependent is another one to look at. As we look at things like raw materials, the more you buy of something, the lower the price goes down. So do you have tiers built in? Is everything the same price? And you need to understand, as you grow and your contractors, your suppliers give you cheaper prices, what does that look like? How can you then scale up and lower your costs, actually hopefully increase your margins as well? When we think about dynamic pricing, things that are always changing and in flux, it might not be a very high percentage of folks out there doing this, but bargaining. If you go to the swap meet, right, the flea market, you're bargaining. Price is $1, I'll give you 50 cents for that. It's just like you do a yard sale, right? If you go overseas, that happens quite a bit in different countries. So think about this: where are you selling it? Who are you selling it to? Auctioning. This is becoming more, prominent with things like eBay, other online auction sites. So do you have something that you're putting up for a specific price? Is it an auction? Is it a reserve price that you don't want to go below, or a buy it now price? So that's a way to price something, but it's dynamic, right? It's fluctuating. You might sell one for $10 and something else for $15, the same exact item. Or market dependent. I'm sure all of us have gone to a steakhouse and you say, you see surf and turf, and you're like, what's the price? Because it says market price. Well, it depends on the price of lobster that year, right? So if market price of lobster is really low, it's going to be a much lower price for surf and turf. That's great. If it's really high, it's maybe it's $70, $80 for surf and turf. Recently, something that several of us I've experienced, maybe you have too if you're in the market for healthcare, but the COVID-19 price for masks, right? Last year, PPE gear went through the roof. The states, government, everybody was trying to get it. The price went up because raw materials and the cost to make it overseas went way up, and there was a shortage. So that's market dependent. Then you have yield management. So think about things like hotel rooms or airline seats. You might be able to get a really good deal on the day of a flight if there's a one seat left and they just want to sell it the plane, and you got a round trip to Dallas for $79. Same thing with hotels. If people like TripAdvisor and others will get overstock rooms, they might be able to sell them at a cheaper rate because the hotel wants to sell them out. So what's that yield? They might have only got to 60% capacity, and they're wanting to get at least 80, 90%. So they're going to drop those prices to get people, right, butts and seats, because they want to recoup some of that cost. Many entrepreneurs that have come through recently have looked at freemium type examples. And when we look at freemium, and what does that mean? It really means you're starting with something free to a user, and then you're moving up market to add more features, more bells and whistles for more sophisticated users. Some of the early ones of freemiums were some online, photo sharing type things, even some of the social media groups. So if you're using or creating some business model where you think, hey, I want to give this thing away because I want to look at advertisers later, that's an area, or I want the high volume users to pay more. Zoom is a great example, right? Many of you might have Zoom accounts, the freebie, but you're limited to 40 minutes of time, then they cut you off. You can't really record stuff. You have a limited number of people. So they said, great, let's get everybody using Zoom so that they're comfortable with it, they know how to use it, it's now the buzzword. But then let's go up market and create more pro, business enterprise type accounts where you have gigs of storage, you have more bells and whistles like whiteboards, and annotation and sharing type of things and recording. So it's a great way to get traction. You obviously need to understand the runway of how long it's going to take to do that, because you're giving everything away for free. So how much capital do you need to continue that? When do you then start? So a lot of great questions around that, but it is a valid business model from a revenue monetization standpoint to get to market. That kind of leads us into the three high-level business model types. Most folks are direct of some level, whether it's a product or service, you're going to sell not direct to consumer per se, but direct to somebody. It could be the consumer, could be a business, could be a distributor or original equipment manufacturer, right? All these things, but you're selling it to somebody, the service, the product. Then we talk about a multi-sided business model. When you think about multi-sided, Facebook, right, started that. Now you have Airbnb and Uber. You are creating something that you're in the middle, and you're bringing users as well as potential advertisers together. And that multi-sided model is obviously much harder, so you need to understand both sides of that. For Uber, you have drivers that you have to hire and have drivers with cars, and then you also have the users, the people, right, that are the passengers. So you're in the middle taking a piece, but you're the platform making it all happen. And then marketplaces, which is slightly different. Think of eBay and Amazon. So, Amazon probably really started this. They're the largest in the world. And you're really just a platform for buyers and sellers. You're, like it says, a marketplace where people can buy goods, maybe services as well, but you are taking a piece of the action. Maybe you're even getting fees for shipping, for other things, but you're just bringing people together to buy and sell. So to recap, multi-sided platform, you bring in two or more groups together. There's really only value if both groups are present. So when you think about Facebook, for the advertisers, they didn't want to come and say, yeah, we're going to give Facebook a bunch of money to advertise unless there was users there, right? So that was the other group. And many of us don't want to go unless we have friends that are there. So you like someone, someone invited you. So that's kind of how that works, the advertisers especially. When you think of Uber, right, we're not going to use Uber unless there's someone that has a car there to actually pick us up. So same with Airbnb. They started with just one rental. Then, okay, how do we get other physical assets to actually rent out before we start getting too many users on? And you're really facilitating interactions between the groups. And that's called network effect. Users attract users. right? You know, the likes, the sharing, all those things. So let's talk about cost now. Excuse me. So when we look at cost, think about classes of cost first. Cost driven, value driven. So cost driven, you're focusing on minimizing your costs, getting very lean, very efficient in your operations, being the low cost provider, Southwest, Walmart's, right? Costco, things like that. Or are you value driven? You are at the high end of the market, you're Ritz, you're Tiffany, you know, custom, you know, type of services you might provide. Those are the two extremes. And most businesses probably fall somewhere in the middle, trying to compete locally on their relationships, their sales, their service acumen. But you're really, when you look at the end of it, if you draw a line, you've got the value and the cost driven. It's really hard to do both. When you look at characteristics of some of these, when you think about fixed costs, you know, your rent, your salary, manufacturing sites, things like that, and Roger's going to talk about these when we do budgets. Variable costs. If you were creating, let's say, a music festival, you know, a concert series, that could be a very different cost structure for you because you are not going to own all the assets, the locations. You might rent a, you know, Sleep Train or Golden One Arena or somewhere else, and you're paying a variable cost. Then you also have the variable cost of the band, who is coming in that week to or month to play, right? They might cost more than someone else. Then you might have a minimum of 10,000, you know, people to break even, and what if you only get 5,000? So those costs. Then we look at economies of scale. Think of things like bulk purchasing, Costco. You are, let's see, buying one thing, you know, maybe it is a specific wine. We go into Costco and we see wine and it's cheaper than going anywhere else. They're buying pallets and pallets of that, so they're getting it at a cheaper price. Economies of scope is a little bit different, and people usually don't think about economies of scope because it's more of a horizontal, large company enterprise. Think of PepsiCo. Vertical integration, things, you have multiple products, you have waters, you have you know, Pepsi's, and you have different business units that you own, different products under different labels. But economies of scope could help you with HR, your IT department, your logistics. You have trucks on the road delivering many different brands. And so things like that can help you across the board as you start to grow and diversify. So as you get bigger, economies of scope, you could actually use partners to even help you do this. Just helps you lower those costs from looking at entire across the business unit. So here's a couple examples of some of these game-changing cost structures when we think about, well, how do I do something really unique to lower my costs? Skype, the first ones that use the internet, right, for, you know, business conversation, video, chatting for free. So they're like, well, how do we do this instead of introducing our own satellites, our own cable network, putting in fiber? They use the internet, so it's free, it's already there. So using somebody else's stuff can significantly lower your costs. Same with Uber. So Uber didn't buy fleets of taxis. They just said, okay, bring your own car. We don't have to buy it, maintain it, do anything with it, insure it. You're just going to use it. Same with Netflix, right? They use the internet for over-the-top video streaming, and they didn't have to, again, put in any infrastructure to deliver these services, so they lowered their costs. Just a quick comment on this topic of value innovation, this concept. So as you move forward in the future and you're trying to innovate, one of the things we want to do obviously is lower our costs and increase our value so we can increase our price and our margin. And we call this value innovation. And it's really difficult to do. Most people can't lower their costs and increase their price and be at the high end of the market, right? You're usually one of the others. The way to do this is a concept we talked about a few weeks ago, blue ocean strategy, really creating new market space, right? If I create something new where there's no competitors, which is what many of you entrepreneurs are trying to do, you've seen a problem, you're creating something new, you don't think there's anyone doing it, you're creating value and your cost structure could be low. It doesn't mean your price has to be low. Your price could be significantly higher because this thing you're creating is new to the world. It's solving a massive problem in theory, right? Significant problem that you've gotten validation from early adopters that they have a problem, they want it solved, they have money. As you're creating something new like this is when you can create and do value innovation. Once you're in that, red ocean competitive industry where all you're doing is competing on price, then your margins go down, your costs go down, and you can't do both things. So you entrepreneurs are in a good spot to do what we call value innovation and reap the rewards. Keep your costs low, but your value and your price high. So let's talk about the offer and the MVP. So we went through the lean canvas, got through our other sections. So the last few weeks we talked about problem solution fit, right? Getting insights from customers, going to talk to them, understanding what they need, validating your hypothesis that there's some problem out there, and then experiment around that, go out and validate, lower our risk and uncertainty. The old way of doing things is then to build something, the finished product. Even before that, the old way was to build something, then try and go out and sell it. And if it didn't work, then reiterate that and do it again. But it's really costly and it takes a lot of time to do that. The lean startup, the entrepreneurial mindset method is to do it backwards. And this is where a lot of people struggle. You can actually create an offer with no physical product or service, nothing that you've created of any significance. You do not have to create your MVP to go out and try and sell it to generate revenue. First, we can create an offer that can be basically something on paper, could be vaporware, but it is defining what your unique value prop is and what your minimal viable product will be, and getting buy-in from the customers to say, yes, I would buy that for this price, put me on your list, your waiting list, your sign-up sheet, whatever it is, here's a down payment, start me, here, whatever it might be. Yeah, you're going to deliver it in 2 months, I'll give you, 10% down now. This is the way of the lean startup, the new way of the entrepreneurs to lower risk, lower your out-of-pocket, lower your uncertainty that anyone cares about this before you waste time. We've done the experimentation to prove that someone wants it. Now you create the offer. Then we'll create the MVP later once we actually go back to somebody and they start giving revenue around the offer. We can then go back and build the MVP. What does it look like here on our flow chart? You did this, you put your business model together, you then got insights. We're now creating our solution with some ideation we did last week. Now we're creating an offer, right, where the rubber hits the road. You got feedback, go back to your customer. Could be a slideshow, could be a Excel sheet, a Word document. Here's the offer, Mr. Customer. Here's what you said you needed. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the price. Are you in? You don't have to spend a lot of money to do that. And hopefully then we refine our model and then create the MVP. The theory behind this, we call this the mafia offer. You want to have so much validation from your market that you are creating an offer that they can't refuse, right? Hey, you buy this or else, right? Kind of the mafia thing, but you're not really forcing them. You're just giving them something so directly tied to what they have told you their problem is and what they want that now you've solved it for them. They're like, yeah, that's perfect. You build it, I'm going to buy it. We look at this as instead of, your mafia offer consists of your unique value prop, the theory itself, the demonstration of what that thing can do, product or service. And that could be a prototype, it could be a little quick video or a slideshow, right? In theory, it doesn't have to be working. And then the price. So that shows them what the value is going to be, how it's going to work, and what it's going to cost them. That's the mafia offer. This is counterintuitive to the way we used to do things, right? We used to build stuff, we would demonstrate it, and then you try and sell it. We're saying do it backwards to lower your risk as an entrepreneur. Demo this unique value prop, vaporware, virtually, whatever it is, then sell them on the idea, get buy-in, and then go build it, right? You've reduced your risk significantly versus the old way of doing stuff, which takes way too long and is way too risky, which is why 9 out of 10 startups fail. You're building stuff nobody wants. So when you think about this kind of diagram, your thing in a box that's special is your unique value prop. You're going to demo it, you're going to price it. That's your MVP once we get there. Let's look at an example, real world examples of demoing, selling it, and then going to build it versus the other way around. So when Apple first released the smartphone, very first one, they did not build a bunch of these and put them in Apple stores and say, come buy them and try and market them. Jobs did talks and conferences to the who's who and analysts and newspapers and early adopters, and compared it to all the other things that were out there, right? The Palm, BlackBerry, Moto, and the problems with those, and basically said, I can build this, and here's my price. Are you in? And then they went and built it. Let's look at another one, Tesla. So Tesla in 2003, when they were first wanting to build their sports car, they did not go build the sports car, then go demonstrate how fast it was or cool it was, and then try and sell it. They did it backwards. They went and bought a Lotus Esprit as a prototype. They took out all the insides, the engine and everything, the seats, and put in their own stuff, and basically in this shell, slapped some stickers on it as Tesla, and said, hey, Mr. Potential customer, would you buy this Roadster at this price, all electric sports car, if we build it? And people said yes. They said, okay, put your money where your mouth is, give us $5,000 down, and we'll put you on our list, and we'll let you know when it's ready. And they had over 100 people do that. So you're getting proof, early adopters, giving you money, which you haven't built anything. All you create is a prototype. You reduce your risk versus spending millions on putting a plant together, the old way of doing it, putting stuff on a lot and now trying to sell it. So quickly on MVPs. When we look at it's called the innovation curve, kind of diffusion of innovation, we're trying to find really these early adopters, right? You can lump in the innovators with them. The big market is here, right? The early and late majority. That's the big market in any market in the world. And you have the slow to adopt people. This area here is the hardest thing to jump over. This big scary chasm, called crossing the chasm. Most businesses get to this 10% and they stop. They don't grow any more than 10% because you're not hitting the majority of the market. And that's because most businesses, not just early companies, but ones that have been around forever, they have went to market with the same product, which should have been their MVP, and they never evolved it. Your MVP is only made for these early adopters. Minimal viable product, minimum entry into the market, which is what these people want, right? You don't have to give me all the bells and whistles. These people don't want the MVP. They want a next generation product or service. They want more features, more value, and hopefully your economies of scale, you can lower the price. To get there, you have to evolve your MVP to some other thing later on. And it takes about 2 years to get to product market fit, where you have evolved your MVP to something else and can jump this cavern. It's not quick. But people think, oh, I got to market with this first thing, that's what everyone wants. And that's not true. You've got to evolve it. So we talked about early adopters in the last couple of weeks, and the MVP is really meant for them. So we'll talk about early adopters a bit again. Again, it's that minimum feature set. It's a tactic to reduce wasted engineering hours, right? Code on the floor, because you don't want to over-engineer the initial product. You're not making it, again, for this late and early majority. They're not buying your product. Early adopters are buying your product, and they're buying your vision. They're buying just a minimal feature set that's going to resolve the biggest problems first. You're selling the vision, delivering the minimum features. So the benefits of an MVP for you as an entrepreneur, you get to know your users better. You're going to save time and money by just building the minimum what they want. You can focus on your core hypothesis, right? This problem or the biggest problems, I'm going to solve those first, not all the bells and whistles. And avoid this whole fallacy of the perfect business plan. It has to evolve. And also we need this feature too. You're going to talk to hundreds of potential customers. 80% of those probably are going to be people who are not early adopters. And they're going to say, oh, well, I'd buy it if you had this, this, and this. Okay, that's great. I'll make a note of it. But you're not my early adopter. You're not who I'm building this for initially. I'm building it for the early adopter who says, yes, that's my problem. I got a budget, solve that, and I'll buy it. Not, I'll wait for all the other bells and whistles. And just for definition's sake, here we got, minimum viable product. You folks want some good visuals. It's a great way, this is sufficient for early adopters, what we're talking about. And it's just a bare bones. It's not the end all be all of your product. There's also a different way to look at it, a different mindset. So we think about things historically as functional. I've made this product or service, and I'm making all of the features on it to do X, Y, or Z. Don't think about it in that way when you think about your minimum viable product. Think about it as we've talked about jobs to be done, also emotional and social jobs, not just functional jobs. So if you gave me just a canteen of one, maybe it's one size, but how is that going to help me in these other areas? Okay, reliability, usability, delightful, delightability, call it, emotionally, socially. What are the minimum things you need to do there? You don't have to have maybe a whole color scheme of 50 colors for a hydro flask, but maybe you have 3 or 4 to start with. Maybe there's 2 or 3 different sizes versus probably dozens now. So maybe there's a limited warranty. What do you do versus just here's the thing, which is a functional thing. So think about it in these terms, a minimal set of all those criteria for MVP. And you should be getting that feedback from your early adopters as you're gathering insights on their jobs to be done, right? The pains, the gains, and jobs we talked about. Here's an example of an MVP. And these are probably the best examples in the world right now is, basically pop-up tents for restaurants or mobile restaurants, right? You've got a trailer, a van, whatever it is, and you're able to go to a specific area, geographic location, which targets specific demographic, maybe income or ethnic or age, and you're going to see, do these folks that I'm targeting like what I have to sell at this price point? And if not, great, you can mobilize and go to somewhere else. So it's a very easy way to do that. Here's another one where you see, obviously, they've hit something here where you have a line, even in the rain, where people are waiting for this barbecue. And you can then go to different segments and figure out, all right, people like it. They like, do they like certain foods or all the foods? How do we, if we wanted to create a restaurant, which ones do we get the best feedback on? So it's a great way to do testing. So building this MVP, we've talked about in theory of you get the Mafia offer, then you can go build the MVP. Well, to do the building of the MVP, you're going to have to do a lot of prototyping, and that could be part of your offer, which is a very down and dirty, minimalistic type approach to build something. Think about a physical product. And then when we talk about services, we'll show that in a second. So let's talk about this process of prototyping and helping you get to your MVP. We've done the ideation, we've done all the other thing in design thinking. Now we've got to build something. Don't think about prototyping as refining the picture of your first idea. Think about it as exploring alternatives to the solution, to the idea. You might have many iterations of this prototype.
You keep saying solutions. That's weird to me. When you say solutions, that's weird to me. I figured out a way to start a business easier. The problem was,
I've got some comments there. Is there someone else got a comment for us?
that's not that weird problem.
Sorry, was there a question?
We had somebody with comments about solutions.
Yes, so. All right.
All right. Yeah, no, throw it in the chat. It sounds like a good question. So prototyping is all about exploring alternatives. Quick quote, Bezos. I believe we're the best place in the world to fail. Obviously, when he was at Amazon, we have plenty of practice, and failure and invention are inseparable twins. So, he spent half his time on innovation pieces there at Amazon. So hundreds or thousands of groups doing tests all the time, prototyping. Most of them never saw the light of day. So we want to actually talk through what could that look like for you? What do actually people do in prototyping? It's this simple, from tinfoil and construction paper to paper clips and clothespins and staples, trying to put something together that shows the user they can actually see, feel, maybe touch or use something that's obviously not going to be the way it looks when you manufacture it. And here's a good example of Google Glasses, right? Google VR. It wasn't molded plastic, that they spent millions of dollars having someone do as a first version. It was cardboard, some foam, and some, kind of plastic, or glass, cheap inserts here to say, would this form factor work for you? Would you use it, right? Does it feel comfortable? Can you see through it? And it's really simplified. When you're talking about products, that's really what you're talking about when you start with your initial prototypes, to get feedback from the market. And that's really what you're trying to do, is just making sure you don't spend a bunch of money and time building something that's wrong and you got to go back and just tweak it minor. When you have a service, it's a little bit harder, right? You're not building something. So how do you do that? Well, a storyboard is the way you prototype a service. So a storyboard is a visual representation of a sequence and breaks down the action into individual panels, right? So if you sell a service of some sort or experience, you need to understand, how does the customer use this thing from start to finish? You might only be selling, this thing, this is the service, right? Draw a circle around whatever scope that is. But the user might have to do a few more steps to get there, to come to your location, to use something, to dispose of something. You need to understand that experience so that you know where their pains and where their issues might be when you design your service or experience. So here's an example of a food e-coupon service. So we've all used kind of Groupon or other e-coupons before. Well, how would it simply work if you thought about this as a brand new concept? Maybe somebody sees a commercial, here's a commercial, so they're going to download the app right on their phone. So you download the app and now you start the order. You might actually have to, in some cases, join, right? Create a profile. They place the order, then they wait the estimated time. It tells them they're going to have to wait to go pick something up. They drive to the restaurant. They take the survey to get your coupon, give them the coupon, pick up your food, right, to get your discount. So that is just a way, quick and dirty, and maybe there's many more steps you can add there, to understand the customer's journey, what they have to do, so that when you build that service, you're not missing a feature. Maybe if it's technology, you're not missing some code, maybe a third-party partner you have to interact with, right? Who's going to be the e-commerce, the payer transaction. Maybe there's a driving company involved if you're doing delivery. So this just gives you a visualization of the service. We're actually going to do a quick example of this. We've got about 8 minutes to do this, and then we're going to move on to Roger's section. So what we're going to do is Cameron's going to break us into some breakout rooms, 2 groups on a mural board, and we're going to pretend that we are a user of Starbucks. And many of us probably are. And how do we use the Starbucks app, right, to place an order? What does that look like? So many of you are probably really good experts at this and can help us just storyboard this out so you get some hands-on experience. So Cameron, over to you.
Awesome. So I want to give just maybe 2 minutes to see if there's any quick questions before we head in there, and then we'll transition into the breakout room. So John, it looks like you got a question. Are you you're preparing for the breakout room? There we go. All righty. Well, I will open the breakout rooms and we'll be back at 53. All righty. See you then. And if you don't see anything, you're hanging out here and we will be using this room for our breakout room. So I'm going to share this and hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. All righty. So we're going to be storyboarding here for the Starbucks app if we were to be ordering a coffee or something. So what's the process we would be going through if we were going to storyboard it as, hey, we're Starbucks, we're, moving to an online ordering component. We want to build out this app. What does that look like from the user's experience if we're going to storyboard it? What's that starting process? No, we don't have the app yet. But we
I
know
guess
we want-
putting together the menus.
So from the customer perspective,
Splash page.
Yeah.
so we're wanting to we're Starbucks developing the storyboard for the user's experience, right? So not from how our designers would be looking at it, more so of how our users might actually go through the process of using the application.
Oh, okay.
But they have to do a splash page first, see like the design of Starbucks on their splash page first.
So some sort of marketing component to let them know the app's available.
Yes.
Okay. Landing page. All right. Maybe bigger than I wanted, but let's go like this. There we go.
I'm not sure if it would be a sign up or a sign in next, or maybe both.
Sign up or sign in. I like it. What do we think as a group?
Are they different? I'm on the
Do they
landing
download
page.
the app first or?
Right.
Any ideas? They go to the landing page and now how are they going to get the app? Do they download it? Do they use a web browser? What's the functionality?
Both.
Okay, well, we're going to choose one of those experience. What's the ideal user experience that we want them to have?
Play Store
So
or
they
whatever Apple uses.
to App Store, Play Store. Okay. And then we download the app. Is there a cost to it?
No, it's free.
Okay. Now that we download the app, what's next? Do we just start ordering? Do we create a profile? Do we
Search the
choose
menu.
Well, they want to make
location?
it. They want to make it as easy as possible.
Right.
Sign up
So-
or sign in at this point, right?
You tell me. This is if we were creating it from Starbucks' lens, what do we think is the best way to get the users to continue on?
Usually on most apps, after you download them, they ask you to either sign up or sign in, depending
Okay.
on if you signed up on their website. You signed up on their website or you sign up through the app itself.
Perfect. Mel, you were going to say something as well?
Yeah, it's the same. Create an account.
Perfect. Account, okay. All right.
Yeah,
Now
usually
that
there's
we-
like an incentive, right? Because sometimes I think you can just buy, but then if you sign up, you usually get like perks and they email you discounts sometimes and the points, and so they kind of, you kind of make you want to sign up,
I like it. That's a great thing. So we'll go like that. Okay, so they sign up, they create the account. What's kind of entailed in that sign up process? Do you have to choose like your location? Do you put credit card information already in? Do you put money into an account that's a Starbucks account?
I think to sign up, they just need like your name and some identifying information. But then if you're actually going to order, you can, put in your credit card and then maybe choose whether to have it saved in the system or not.
Okay. We'll just name and like email. Okay. Okay. All right, we're chugging along. We got the account built, so now we're ready to. Are we ordering or are we finally getting there?
Search the menu.
Okay. Search menu. All right, and then we probably select our goods at that point. So how do we know where we're picking it up? When does that come in?
Select the location.
Where in the process though?
Could be next.
Hmm?
Could be next.
Could be next. All right. Okay, so we select it. All right, we got our order. It's in the cart. We got where we're picking it up. Is there enter payment information? Do we pay when we get there?
Yeah, some of them give you the choice. You want to pay online, you want to pay when you pick up.
Choice of payment. What we got is all right, and then we
Place the order, right? Is there anything else?
okay. Place and confirm order. All right. All right, so then we go and we finally pick it up. And do we get to go into like a special line or QR code, or how do we? All right, so I'll just put that in there. Special line. Okay, so I'm gonna call them back. I know sometimes this seems pretty rudimentary in terms of the process, but one of the things is if you have this out of order, or you have something that's overbearing at the beginning, right? If you're already putting credit card information when you're downloading the app, you can easily turn off your customers, right? And so using this as a blueprint when we get user feedback is always a key component, as it'll drive us to see where some of those chinks in our process might be as we get that user feedback. So
Cameron, we're all back and we're ready to get to the fun stuff here and turn it over to Roger. So I'll let you introduce
Perfect.
Roger. Get in control.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have Roger Godfrey. As I mentioned, he's the SVP and Senior Relationship Manager at California Bank of Commerce. He helped us out with our last toolkit series, and we're excited to have him back again. You'll find out he is certainly an Excel wizard and can navigate it quite quickly. So he'll be teaching you some of those quick tricks as well. And then I also just want to point out that California Bank of Commerce is a key partner of the Carlson Center and has invested to support our mentor network. So we're really excited to have them as part of our resources. So without further ado, Roger, feel free to take the reins here and control our screens for us.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And thanks again for having me on. Really excited to be here again. And this is now the third one of these we've done. So hopefully it's getting better and better each time.
You got it.
Let me just share my screen here. Okay. All right. There it goes. Let's give it a second here. All right.
Good to go.
So as Cameron mentioned, going to be talking about financial projections tonight, and purpose of tonight is really to help you all wrap your heads around what financial projections can be used for, the value that you can get out of these. We'll go through some tips and tricks and ways to work through Excel to start building these. But unfortunately, it'll be outside of the scope tonight on building a full-blown model with balance sheet, income statement. There's week-long classes out there that are dedicated to both learning Excel as well as building models. So really the goal tonight is to give you a baseline on kind of how to think about your business and then get that into Excel in a form that's both usable to potential investors and capital partners, as well as to yourselves as business owners as you're starting to build these companies and think through what you need to do. So as I mentioned, we'll talk about what financial projections are. Drilling this down into something useful, you really want your projections to be driven off your business activity. So getting down into what is driving your businesses and how to convert that into financial performance. And so in order to do that and focus on that, we're going to be looking at what we call unit economics, and we'll drill into that a little bit later and what that looks like. We'll then get into some best practices, both for building a model as well as working in Excel. And then we'll do a quick exercise at the end, building a little income statement, as well as generating a graph that can be useful for burn analysis and runway. And so we'll get into that towards the end. Up front, I always like to talk about what I call the lingo. There's many different terms that are used interchangeably when referring to a projection or a budget or a forecast. Doesn't mean that someone's wrong, but it's good to know that when they say one of these words, they could mean one of the other. So it's just important to know these. So these are the more kind of traditional definitions. We'll start with budget. These tend to look out on a longer horizon as you go around this clockwise, and as well as complexity. Budget is, if you think about this, it's, where do you want the business to go? These are usually short-term, 1 year or less. They're often used more as a management tool for existing businesses. And you're really looking at, where do you want production to be over the next year? And it gives you a tool that you can then track performance to where you want the business to go. Very similarly, a forecast is where the business is likely going. So this could mean you have a budget on where you want the business to go, but you expect some things to hit. So, people were changing their forecasts in April of 2020, which was, when COVID was really taking hold, and the budgets that they had from February weren't really any good anymore. So forecast is looking out a bit further. What is going to happen to the business based on some, outside event, or maybe even some internal decision that you're making. That also ties in a little bit with what a projection is. Typically, we see in the banking world projections, I like to be 5 years out. Obviously, the further out you get, the more difficult it is to have exact numbers and projections. But it's good to determine, what's going to happen with the business if you do something. If we open another location, if we add another business line. So you're projecting what will happen to your business if you make a change, rather than with your budget and forecast, you're really, looking forward as what's going to happen to the existing business. And then the last item here is a little bit different. It's called a pro forma, another term that's used interchangeably often. When we refer to a pro forma, it's what does a historical period look like after adjusting for a future event. Most oftentimes we're talking about acquisitions. So you have historical financial performance on two different companies. What would it have looked like in the past if those were combined? And that's going to give you a good baseline for possibly predicting what's going to happen in the future. So really, you're applying a future event to historical numbers to give yourself a baseline on kind of what you're going to then project out going forward on the two companies combined. So this one's a little different, a little bit more backwards looking. We're going to refer to these as projections kind of throughout this evening and this example. You know, key question is, you know, why do I need a financial projection outside of the obvious answer that people want to see one if they're going to invest in your business? There's many different reasons why these are important. I always start with internal reasons because I think more importantly is these are an incredibly useful tool for you in not only understanding your business, but helping make some of these decisions that Brian was talking about and building these companies and, you know, helping you to price where you need your products to be. Because, you know, as we get into the unit economics, you start figuring out the key drivers of your business, and that's going to help you determine how much you need to charge based on the cost, how many people you need to hire, what kind of equipment, locations, you know, what other type of software that you're going to need. And that's, you know, more importantly, useful to you internally. We'll get to the external uses here, but it's going to help you with predicting success. What do you need to do? You know, what do you need to charge in order for this business to be profitable, to be successful, to achieve the goals that you want? It's also going to help you look at timing of cash flow. Are you a seasonal business? You know, are you going to be in that 2-year ramp up period that Brian was talking about? Is that a 1-year period? Is it a 3-year period? You know, when is your cash coming in, which is also going to help you determine how much capital you need and when you're going to need it, which is very important, especially when you're talking to investors about bringing in that capital. It's also going to help with resource acquisition. You know, we're going to use a lemonade stand as a simple example through this presentation. You know, pretty basic, but will help highlight a lot of these concepts. So, you know, resource acquisition, when are you going to need a second location? When are you going to need another juicing machine? You know, when are you going to need to hire more staff on the back end, like HR, accounting, that ties in with personnel planning? How many people are you going to need to run your business? So having a monthly projection looking out multiple years is really going to help you make these decisions and, you know, keep your business lean, you know, not spending more money up front than you need to, not creating more overhead than you absolutely need to. You know, the goal being get into positive cash flow as quickly as possible, because that's when you're going to start making money and your investors are going to start seeing their returns. So also important, external uses, you know, depending on where you're getting your capital from, people are going to want to see what you're projecting. You know, if you're getting money and capital from family and friends, they're likely just going to want to know when they're going to get paid back. As you work more into angel investors and venture capital, you know, they're going to be more sophisticated. They're going to have more questions. A projection model is going to help you articulate your business, your plan, and it's going to help, you know, get them on board and really provide some of the details that they're looking for. And then as you continue to move through the capital stack, you're going to start looking at, you know, commercial banks and other cheaper sources of capital, you know, lower interest rates, but they tend to be, you know, more risk adverse. And they're going to want to know, you know, what the cash flow projection is, when you're going to pay those loans back and what the timing of that. Can you generate enough cash flow to meet your principal and interest payments, for example? So a lot of external sources are going to want to see these numbers, and it's just going to help you articulate your business model and how you're going to be successful to outside sources. Any questions on any of that so far, or the terminology, before we get into the unit economics and drivers here?
I don't see any in the chat as of yet, but I'm happy to pause and see if there's any questions that people want to throw in the chat, or unmute yourself and we can bring it into the space.
And
all right.
Thank you very much. That was a very clear explanation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And feel free to chime in or put something in the chat as we're going through here, and we'll address those as we go. So don't be shy if you have any questions.
Perfect.
So we talked about unit economics, and really this is getting down to a few key items that drive your business, which we're going to use as the basis for creating a financial projection. It's got to be grounded in facts, you know, defendable theses, And unit economics is going to really help us dig into what those drivers are and kind of what the underlying core performance of your future businesses are here. So I'm going to use an example, very simple income statement here. Revenue 15,000. We've got your cost of goods sold. These are the direct variable costs Brian was referring to easier. These are going to change. Then they're directly correlated with the amount of business that you're doing. So, more units you sell, more subscriptions you have, these are going to vary directly based on that volume. That comes down to a gross income or a gross profit, which is really your core operating profit there, which is really just what you're making and what the cost of producing that is. And then we get into your operating expenses. These are generally fixed and not variable. So these could be things like rent, utilities, salaries for office people, things that you're going to have to pay regardless if you sell one item or 100 items. And these can also be scalable depending on the volume, which we'll get into here shortly. But generally, if you don't sell anything, these are expenses that you're still going to have to pay. So it's very important to be cautious of not taking on too much of this overhead, which is another term that can be used for that. And then I throw in depreciation here just to fill out the income statement. You've got typically will have fixed assets that depreciate over time. The more you use a machine, the less valuable it is, and you do have to account for that. So that's typically an expense. So an example of a below the line expense that we say below this operating expenses, drilling down finally to a net income number. So pretty simple income statement, but this could be any different type of business. So I wanted to highlight two potentially different types of businesses. So going back to our lemon example, first example here is, this could be one brand new lemon juicing machine. It's the latest and greatest, and you could generate this same revenue and income off the sale of one unit. That could take you a year to build, and profit is still the same compared to a second item where you're a lemonade stand and you're selling 3,000 glasses of lemonade at $5 a unit. Exact same income statement, exact same profit, but on a per unit basis, you're making $278 per cup of lemonade versus $8,350 based on one machine. Now, the real question is, which do you think an investor is going to prefer? And it's a little bit of a rhetorical question because the answer is really, it depends. You could scale this business up where all of a sudden, if you're selling, 10 of these machines, that could be wildly more profitable than a market for lemonade over here. However, it's easier to sell additional cups of lemonade than it is to build a whole nother machine. So really it's, what is the plan for the business? What is your goal? But it's important to understand what is driving that performance. And in this case, it's sales of glasses of lemonade versus an entire machine. And you can see the difference between those two models. We talk about the scalability of that. So I want to walk through an example. So let's take our lemonade stand example. So we're coming back with this exact same income statement for our lemonade stand. 3,000 glasses of lemonade, you're making $278 per glass. Obviously, the goal is going to be to continue growing that. So let's say you move into our next phase of business. You're selling more glasses of lemonade. You're starting to gain some traction. You're gaining a customer base. You're seeing the fruits of your labor, pun intended. As you continue to grow, this may be one lemonade stand. You're not going to have, another location. You could add these additional 2,000 units without really adding additional people, rent, utilities. But, you might be able to get better economies of scale, which is another thing Brian had talked about as you're buying more lemons. So you're going to your lemon supplier, and as you buy more, you get a better discount. So let's say, your cost of goods is going up because you're selling more lemons, but you're getting a better deal. You're extrapolating these units out for, your fixed expenses stay the same. So you're getting more money without increasing those expenses here. So your actual fixed expense per glass of lemonade goes down and your profit goes up. You hit the next phase of business. Now all of a sudden you're selling 10,000 glasses of lemonade. Maybe that's all still out of that same lemonade stand and your supplier's starting to take notice. Now you're, let's say it takes 5 lemons for a glass of lemonade, and now you're buying 50,000 lemons instead of 25,000. And you start getting those economies of scale some more. And now your cost of goods is actually lower. So you're getting a discount on your supplies. Your cost of producing this revenue goes from 180 a glass to 145. Again, your profit's going up because of that growth, because of economies of scale. Eventually, you're only going to be able to produce so much lemonade. You're going to need another location, more employees, more equipment in order to continue this growth. Now you're hiring people, maybe you're adding additional machines. That's going to result in additional fixed expenses. Whether you sell more lemonade or not, if you hire another person, you're going to have to pay them. If you buy another machine, get another location, you're going to have to pay those expenses. So as long as you're selling more units, you can continue to extrapolate that cost. So while your fixed expenses do go up, if you sell enough units, that per unit cost is still improving, thereby improving your net income per glass. Now, as we've mentioned, that's a double-edged sword, because as long as you're selling more units, it makes sense. In the event where you lose units, let's say your lemonade stand in Dallas, Texas, in March, when they go through the freeze and people just stop buying lemonade, you still have this overhead, but you're not generating the same level. So you can see what happens to that fixed expense when your units suddenly drop and you can't get rid of that expense, thereby reducing that profit per glass. So it's important to pay attention to what your variable costs are and what your fixed costs are. And it's also important, as you're starting to think through this business, helping you determine, what do I need to charge per glass of lemonade to generate this type of profit. Maybe you don't need $2.78 per glass to make your business profitable. Maybe it's only $1. That's going to affect your pricing. And then as you tell the story, maybe this is a year, maybe this is 5 years, but being able to explain to an investor what they can expect from cash flow and exactly how many units you need to sell at what price, it's just going to continue to improve your case and make people more confident in investing in your business. And again, this is a very simple example with a lemonade stand, but these concepts apply whether you're doing a subscription-based business, a software-based business, whether you're producing a good. So these concepts apply across the board. Any questions on any of that before we move on?
There's none in the chat. Are there any questions that people want to just ask straight away, or if you want to throw it in the chat now, you can do so.
We can always revisit this as well if something comes up.
Okay, we'll give it one more second. Sometimes you get one question and then it's the snowball of questions. So
Gotcha.
All right, going once, going twice. All right, it's sold. Back to you, Roger. We're good to go.
Good. So as I mentioned, simple example of lemonade stand. There's lots of different businesses, lots of different types of units. You may not be selling a good. It could be a monthly subscription. It could be, I think of something like Quick Quack Car Wash, where you have one monthly fee and you can go there as many times as you want. So maybe your business model is a lemonade stand where you pay $30 a month and you can get as many glasses of lemonade as you want. Maybe you're a juice of the month club, where you're actually sending out different types of juices each month to clients and they're paying a subscription for that. So there's different ways to look at what your unit is, and that's an important part of eventually getting to a projection of performance, is understanding that. So one of the things that we look at here is, what's the lifetime value of a customer? This LTV, which we refer to as the total amount of revenue that you're going to get from an average customer over all time periods. That could be indefinitely, but in general, you can say, I'm going to have a customer for 5 years and they're going to pay X amount per month, and we're going to generate this much revenue per client. Another piece of that is, what is the cost to acquire that customer? If you have to spend a significant amount of marketing to drum up business versus having a lemonade stand where you're pulling people off the street, this customer acquisition cost is going to be very different compared to what your lifetime revenue is. If you're pulling someone off the street, they might only buy one glass of lemonade and move on. Whereas if you're getting someone who's paying a monthly subscription, that's a different business model. So it's important to take these two items in relation, and we call that LTV to CAC ratio, which is really what is the total value you're going to get from a customer compared to the cost of acquiring that customer. And this is important when we get back to the financial projection, because if it's incredibly difficult and you have a very long lead cycle with acquiring a customer, you may not be as profitable in the initial phases, whether that's the first couple months, whether that's that first couple years. If this cost is incredibly high, but this lifetime value is high, but it's very back weighted, that's going to affect your projection as you're looking out 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So it's important to keep all of this in mind as you start building that model of what this company is going to look like. As we mentioned, we look at this from a ratio perspective. Strong economics, if that ratio is above 1, that means you are generating more revenue than the cost it takes to acquire that customer. So that's a good thing to have, and the higher this ratio, the better. As you approach that 1-to-1, that means you're basically expending the same amount of money that you're going to earn out of that customer. So you have to start thinking, is there an issue with my business model? Or, is this a feasible model at all if, we're spending all the money we're going to earn to get a customer? Because typically you have to spend that money in advance before you get that customer. And then if you're projecting this out and you're seeing this ratio go below 1, it means you're spending more money than you're making with those customers. And you really need to either rethink your pricing strategy or, rethink that business feasibility. Is this a model that's going to work over the long term? So ultimately, the higher that ratio, it means the more money that you're making per customer. So circling up on that, the purpose of unit economics is really to help you drill down and understand what's the core operation of your business. So there's a number of benefits to running through this exercise. It exposes gaps that could be hindering profitability. Are your costs too high? Do you need to lower those fixed costs? Do you need a smaller location with less rent? Do you need less people to start with? What does this company look like as you're growing, and when do you hit that level of profitability? Along those same lines, it's going to help you identify optimal strategies for growth and when to acquire new resources. Working through these exercises is going to help you determine what reasonable expenses are. You're going to have to do some research, and understand what the costs of, in this case, operating the lemon stand are. What do lemons cost? What does a retail location cost per month? How much are people going to, take to pay, hourly, salary? How much equipment are you going to need? And so this is going to help you go through that exercise, not just determine that unit economics, but that's all valuable information that you're going to need to project out this performance and generate that value and that pricing strategy, and evaluate the potential of your business, as well as analyzing that startup performance. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's, how much money do you need to get this business off the ground, and how much runway is that capital going to get you? Do you need 2 years worth of capital before you start turning a profit and start paying for your own expenses? And at what point can you start, paying investors back? These are all questions that they're going to want to know as they're, making that decision whether or not to invest in your business. So with that, we'll move into kind of what building a financial model looks like. Again, we're not going to walk away from here knowing how to build a full-blown model, with income statement, balance sheet, but I want you to walk away with the baseline understanding of how do I start thinking about this? We want to kind of pull the mystique away from, the financial projections. It's, there's very few people out there that are Excel wizards or, accounting majors. A lot of this stuff doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, nor do they have a lot of experience. So the goal here is to give you a base on how to even start thinking about this and build something that's useful to you and your potential outside investors and users. So there's
some music playing there. Hold on, Roger. It's like some,
Yeah.
some music's playing in the background somewhere. I don't know if someone's off mute. Maybe want to check everybody's mute.
No, I think it's either, it might be you. I think you're good to go, Roger.
all right. So there's many different types of financial models out there. Some of them can be pretty intense. So here, these are three common ones that you'll hear about. The 3-statement model refers to income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. This is going to be the model that most of you are going to be using. It's relatively simple compared to these other ones. These other ones you're going to see more in, corporate finance, acquisition finance. These are the ones that you have CFOs and controllers and full teams of accounting staff preparing. So you don't necessarily need more robust models like these to achieve what you guys are looking for in terms of projecting out this business and then selling this value to investors. So these don't have to be incredibly robust models as long as they provide all the information that people are going to need to make a decision. Some best practices to start with is build your model on unit economics. Start with how many glasses of lemonade you think you're going to sell, and then build from there. Drilling down to a handful of key drivers are going to really help you build a model that you can validate, that people are going to have confidence in, a business model that you can defend. If you can drill down into single units, that's going to be incredibly valuable for you and investors. It's also important to be realistic. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, hockey stick growth or just incredible projections that, think companies are going to be wildly successful. And, some people do achieve those, those type of performance and cash flow. But, it's really important to be realistic and, how sustainable is your business? Oftentimes when I'm, analyzing clients' projections, I will take their projection and create my own base case, and then I'll create a downside case. So I've got 3 different projections that show, performance could be here, here, and here. And how does the business look at each one of those stages? So it's just really important to be realistic. A lot of people are going to see hockey stick growth and immediately discount that, and then you're fighting an uphill battle. Another important thing is, this is a tool for you. This is going to make you a better business owner. You'll better understand your business, your market, your strategy. But it's important to update this regularly. Things change frequently. As your business grows, it makes sense to update your projection based on that growth. Maybe you do achieve that hockey stick growth. The projection that you built last year may not be relevant anymore. So it's really important to update this regularly, even monthly in the beginning as you're ramping up, and then as you achieve, a certain level of stability, maybe less frequently. But it's important to keep changing this based on your business. And then, keeping the model simple. As we talked about, there's very robust projection models out there. Drill this down to a couple of those key drivers so that you can continue to update it and continue to keep this useful. If you have too many variables and factors that flow into this model, it's going to be very difficult to, update that as well as explain it to someone. And as you're working through these in the beginning, before you even share it with anyone, Because you're thinking, like, do I charge $5 a glass? Is it $5.25? What happens if I charge $4.75? What if I do a marketing event where you get one glass for free? Having a simple model based on drivers is going to allow you to change your projection quickly and then have that flow through the rest of the model, which is going to be much more useful as you start analyzing different strategies and different scenarios. So along those same lines, I recommend using Excel for this. It's a very robust program and will have all the tools that you need, and it makes tweaks like that easy. So once you build a model, you can make those changes and have it flow through the whole model, and then you can look and analyze different things. What does my cash position look like if I tweak this price? If I go with this lemon supplier who charges 10 cents less, what does my business look like? How much debt do I need at different prices? By just changing a single number, which we'll look at later, it's going to help you make those decisions quickly instead of hand updating an entire model over and over. That's why automating your formulas in Excel is very important. So you're not changing every single cell. If you can have an entire income statement over 12 months change by tweaking one number, that's incredibly valuable as you revisit different situations. I also recommend keeping all of your statements on one Excel sheet, especially if you're not that familiar with Excel. A lot of people will try and get fancy and have their income statement on one page, balance sheet on another, cash flow statement on another, but that just creates a lot more complicated formulas jumping from sheet to sheet. And it also takes up time with you jumping from sheet to sheet. If you can have all on one Excel page, your income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, you can look at that without jumping around. It's easier to tie cells for formulas, and it's going to reduce errors. One thing we like to do is color coding input cells. So cells where you're actually going to be typing into to change those few key drivers that you want to tweak. The traditional form is a blue text for input and black text for a cell that's driven off a formula. So you can look through a sheet and look for anything that has blue text and know that those are editable cells, and you're not going to mess up the formulas that you built on the rest of it. A couple other tips here is using error checks. If you're familiar with accounting, a balance sheet is called a balance sheet because it has to balance. Your assets have to equal your liabilities plus your equity. If you put a simple check at the bottom where this cell must equal this plus this, and that does not equal 0, then you've got an error somewhere in your formulas that your balance sheet is not balancing. So it's easy to put in a few little error checks that will help you determine if your model is not working correctly, because that could impact your potential financial performance. And then another thing I like to do is clearly separate assumptions, or we also call them drivers. So if you can put a section at the top that shows, I'm going to sell this number of units, this is going to be my price per glass, this is my cost of lemons. That puts all of your assumptions up top so you can quickly change them, but it also is good for someone who's using your model. It allows them to see quickly and easily get a summary of what your assumptions are so they can make the decision on the sustainability or viability on their own. The easier you make it for a third party to understand how you are getting to the point that you say you are, the more confidence they're going to have in your performance and in your pitch. So the idea is make this as clear as possible for someone to understand what you're building and what you're doing and what's driving that performance. So we talk about assumptions and drivers a little bit interchangeably, because as you're making a projection, the projection model is driven off of those assumptions. So again, for modeling ease of use, using assumptions allows you to change those quickly. Those changes flow through automatically. You can assess multiple scenarios, and it also gives you model integrity. If you're not changing every cell, every single time you change an idea, you're going to retain those formulas, and your model is going to be much more useful to you. And then, as I mentioned, it's also going to help with the analysis and understanding. It provides the end user that transparency. It's easy to understand what you're projecting on the business performance. and it facilitates, credible challenge to your expectation for the business success. Your investors are going to challenge you with questions. How did you come up with this? Why is revenue showing this? Why are you not projecting positive cash flow until this period? Those assumptions and drivers are going to help you explain that and help them better understand that. So incredibly important as the foundation for your model or your projection. And then lastly, as you're working through this goes back to the 3-statement model. This is rooted in accounting. So if, a lot of people don't have an underlying basis in accounting, and that's okay, but understanding how your basic financial statements tie together, they all work like cogs in a wheel. As you make changes on your income statement, it's going to affect your balance sheet. Changes in your balance sheet are going to affect your cash flow statement. If you're generating revenue, but you're giving your customer terms, you could be showing revenue and profit, but if that cash isn't coming in, you're not showing that on your cash flow statement, you're likely putting a receivable on the balance sheet. As you collect on a receivable, that balance sheet is going to change, and you'll start seeing that cash flowing through the cash flow statement. If you, end up making a payment on a loan, your interest flows through the income statement, but if you're making a principal payment, that comes through on the balance sheet. Both of those come through as cash going out of the business on the cash flow statement. So there's a lot of intertwining with accounting. The beauty of all that is your numbers balance at the end, otherwise something's wrong with the model. So it can make it a little bit frustrating when things aren't balancing, because little changes in each of these can affect the other statements. So it's why you need to be careful with your model. But on the flip side, you'll know if there's an error, if your equity doesn't line up with the profit you're making, if your balance sheet doesn't balance, and so on and so forth. So there's kind of built-in checks and balances to accounting, but those can also be frustrating, especially if you don't have that basis in accounting or an accounting degree. So with that, our kind of last topic of conversation is really possibly, one of the more useful items that you're going to get once you have your projection model built. We refer to these as burn rate and runway, and these are going to be incredibly important to the people who are looking to invest in your business. Or if you're, funding your business yourself, you're going to want to know how soon you have to start making a profit so that this business can support itself. So, we talk about burn rate, if you're just starting up and you're injecting capital, how long is that money going to last before you need to start generating your own positive cash flow? So burn rate really refers to how much cash you're spending each month before you make a profit. Once you're profitable, you could still be burning cash. If you're not making enough profit to match that burn rate, you're going to need additional capital. So it's going to be helpful in identifying at what point in your projection, in your future, you start making enough money to cover those expenses and essentially reverse that burn rate. That's going to tell you how much money you need to ask for from investors, or how much money you're going to need to put in yourself. Runway is directly correlated to burn rate. It's how much money do you have left based on that burn rate. If you have $100,000 of capital coming in up front and you're going through $10,000 a month, you only have 10 months before you're out of cash. Is that enough time for this business to become self-sustaining, or do you need another tranche, another series, an additional injection? If you're projecting growth and you need to purchase a new location, or let's say you're outsourcing manufacturing, but you want to eventually get to the point where you have your own facility and manufacture your own product, how much money do you need to make? How much runway do you have before that decision happens? And are you going to have enough cash to, make that decision, buy that facility, or are you going to need to get additional capital injection? So these aren't just key terms at the beginning of your company's life. These could come into play later as you make significant capital investment decisions. I decided to put this up in the beginning. So this is a burn rate and runway chart that I've created, essentially based on a company that has $300,000 in capital to start. This blue line shows what that cash burn each month is. So you can see in the beginning, it's relatively minimal. Month 5, there's a spike in activity or a decision is made, and that's a $50,000 burn month. You can see what happens to your runway as you continue to burn cash. It continues to go down. Based on this trajectory, if this company doesn't start turning a profit, they probably have 4 to 5 months left here. But this is going to help articulate, what the viability of your company is and how much money you need, which is going to directly tie to that ask. So we won't have time to make a nice, pretty organized chart like this tonight. So I wanted to put this up. This is what we're going to be working towards. This is what investors want to see. Incredibly useful tool for both you and them. So we're going to switch over to Excel here and kind of work through a little exercise, share some Excel tips and shortcuts that you can use to help speed up your work in Excel. Let me see if I can figure out how to get out of here and slideshow. There we go. And then, all right. Can you guys see this Excel sheet now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. I've got 2 screens, so it always confuses me.
You might want to just zoom in just a tad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can do that. That should work. Does that work for you guys?
Works fine for me. I'll defer to, yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up. Sounds good.
All right, perfect. And I've got this on this other screen, so I'm going to be looking away from you guys a little bit here as we work through this. But again, going back to simple Excel sheet, we're going to try and project this thing out for 12 months. And so going back to those drivers, simple thing to start with is how many glasses of lemonade we're going to be selling. So I've built some of this in advance just for the sake of this exercise, but let's just assume that we're starting with 1,000 glasses of lemonade in January. Now, ideally, we're starting businesses that we expect to grow, and trying to understand what that growth rate is going to be important. So let's just say we expect this to grow 10% per month. So a simple thing to do is say, okay, 10% of 1,000 is 100. So the next month we're going to sell 1,100. And if we do another 10%, that's 110 more glasses. That's going to be 1,210 glasses. You can keep going through that, but that can get very tedious. You'll probably need a calculator on the side to do that. It's going to take a long time. And then if you decide that it's got to be 5%, that's going to be a lot of work to go back and change each one of those. One thing that you can do is you can say, I'm going to take this and increase that by 10%. So times 1, which is 100, plus 10%. And it's all math functions, multiplications, pluses, parentheses. And you hit enter, and that does it automatically. And then you can continue to just drag that over, and it's going to automatically increase it. If you see here, that takes the prior cell, times it by 1 plus 10%, 110%, and it just keeps growing and growing. Much easier. You can change your starting units pretty easily. If I want to start at 2,000, but if you want to change that to 5%, that's still a very manual process to change. So we like to use what I've been referring to as drivers. I've coded it in blue, so that's a typable cell. So let's go back and say our initial month is 1,000. If you select all of these cells, you can build a formula so you can change that 10%. So equals prior month times 1 plus that cell. Now, if you hold down Control and hit Enter, it's going to apply that change to every cell. And you realize you're not going to be selling 1 billion glasses of lemonade, so something's wrong there. The first cell was right. But if you dig in here, this formula is a little messed up because it's not using this cell every single time. So Control Z, changes that. If we go back to this prior cell times 1 plus the same cell, so exactly what we did before. But in this case, we're going to click on that C4 and hit F4, which will put the dollar signs in. That's going to anchor that cell that's highlighted in red. And it's going to use that 10% across the whole thing. And I'm doing all this Control Enter, which will apply that change to every single cell that's highlighted. Now you've got the prior month times 10% every time. And now you can say, okay, I want it to be 5%. You know what? I'm feeling bullish. I want it to be 15%. Where that can get into some trouble is if you're not projecting a perfect 15% every month. You could technically put a line in above this and change percentages above and then have this based off of that. So there's lots of different formulas, but for the sake of this, just to show you the simple shortcut, we now have this anchored to here. We'll go back to our 10%. Here's another one. So now we know how many units we're projecting. How much are we going to charge per unit? Let's go back to the example of 5. So what I did here, we can delete that and show you. I can take this whole row, hit equals to get into the formula. We're going to select our number of units, and then we're just going to anchor it to this price per unit using that F4. You get the dollar signs, Control Enter, goes across the whole row. And now you can decide, do I want it to be 475? Do I want it to be 500 a glass? You can make whatever changes you want there. So now we've got our revenue projected. We can change the percentage growth. We can change the price. We now have our cost of goods. So I've kind of put some general numbers in here. Labor, materials are going to cost about this much per unit. So these are more drivers. So we can do the exact same thing, but this time to make it easy, because we could do it, this row and then do it again, this row, or we could do both rows at the same time. Equals the number of units up above, because that units is going to drive both the material and labor costs, times this. We're going to anchor it, but if I hit enter here, it's going to do both rows based on this red cell. So what we want to do is anchor the column to stay the same, but we want the row to change based on this. So if you cycle through F4, that anchors the row, that anchors the column. Control Enter. And see, I messed up here because this took a different one. So we need to anchor. So do highlight all that, F2. We need to anchor this unit too, so it keeps it the same on this row. So we're going to anchor row 4 and have the column change, because we want this to be times that, this to be times that. Now we've got the right numbers in there. So a quick, easy way by typing in a formula in 1 to apply to an entire field of data is going to speed things up. And now you can, again, change these numbers and it's going to flow through. Maybe it's 40 cents. One more cool tip here, if instead of just going through adding this all up, a quick trick is Alt equal. It's going to automatically sum up everything above that in this row for each of the columns you have selected. So instead of saying, this equals the sum of this plus this, you can do that across an entire row. And then I just have this be a function of the revenue. So now you can get all the way down to gross income. I'll speed this up a little bit. So let's just choose some monthly fixed expenses here. $1,000 for marketing and sales. Let's say you've got $5,000 a month in expenses, $2,000 a month in rent. I've got that depreciation in there. Let's just say that's $100 in expense. I built this so that each one of these cells just anchors to that, so you can go through and change it. I now have, these sum up the operating expenses. You can see the sum function there. In this case, I just did Alt equal again. So if you delete that and then just do Alt equal, it just sums up all 3 of these rows directly above it. And now we got down to a net income here at the end. A couple other quick tips. It's nice to make these look pretty. It really helps you identify. So instead of just having this giant block of numbers, which can be confusing, I use up here in the corner, there's some quick action command buttons. You can customize these yourself. The nice thing is with those, if you hit the Alt button, you see numbers appear. It gives you quick commands. So I put a couple formatting ones. So if I was going to just separate this out and put a nice line in, I have my upper border as one of my quick tabs. So I go Alt 7, and now I have a nice, neat line there. I can do the same thing. You can navigate your Excel sheet. So in order to select this whole row here, you can go Shift plus, we'll select a row. You can do Control plus, we'll select a column. Or you can do Control Shift and it'll just go to the end of where the text is, then Alt 7, and I've got my line. I can do Shift Control to the end, Alt 8, and I get my nice, neat accounting line with the double bottom and the single top line. So you can do some really nice stuff with these quick tips for, especially for functions that you're going to repeat over and over again. So this is all good. Gives you your monthly. You can see they're losing money, losing. And then finally in December, they make their first profit based on the numbers we've put in here. It's also helpful to have a total. So again, Alt equals works for rows like columns. Alt equals, sum it up. You can then drag that all the way down. It leaves some kind of messy numbers. So if you hold down Control, you can delete that stuff. And then another nice thing is the format paint is another nice tip. So like, oh, this looks nice and neat. I don't have that same formatting here. I don't want to go through and change these to dollars, put in the borders, do the bolding. You can select the whole row, do format paint, and apply that to the same row next to it, and it'll put the exact same formatting in there. So another quick trick. So this is a little combination of some quick Excel tips. I think this is recorded if you guys want to go back to this and understand that. There's some nice resources online. You can Google Excel shortcuts and get a lot of that information. I'm a little bit of an Excel nerd, so I love shortcuts and quick tips and things like that. And then this also highlights the benefit of doing these drivers, because you're like, oh crap, I'm not going to be profitable to the end of the year. That's a lot of money that I'm going to have to spend before I start earning a profit. You know, what do I need to charge to make myself profitable sooner? And how much money do I need to ask for? Well, the beauty is we can create a chart for that. So I've built this in advance, but basically what I did here was I tied this to the other sheet. So this comes from the income statement. So basically that net profit, that burn rate, or technically a net loss, flows in. So when I change what's going on the income statement, it's going to change here and change this chart. This runway, I put in a plug here for the ask, so you can change the amount of money that you're asking for. And in this case, 10,000 bucks is not going to be enough. You can see this chart, this burn rate slowly turns positive, but your runway goes well below. So you know you've got a problem here with this amount of money. You want that to be positive. So two things, we can either change our ask. Just kind of looking out here, this cumulative burn rate gets to about 21,000. So if we say, let's give ourselves a little cushion, 25,000. Now you can see you've got enough cash as you're losing money to get to this point, but it's still not quite enough. So if you change that to 100,000, now you have enough cash to get through the whole year. This line is above your zero, so you never run out of cash. Once this line falls below zero, so if you go back to, let's say, 30,000, you fall just below zero. So 30,000 is just not enough. At this point, you either have to inject more money or change your pricing sooner before that happens. So this is going to help you dial in what that ask is, what your need is based on your business. And maybe you say, all I have is 20,000 to get this business off the ground. Well, maybe you need to charge more. If you charge $6 a glass, does that change? It does. So now you turn profitable after month 8, and your $20,000 gets you through until you start seeing your cash balances increase. So your runway gave you enough runway to get through your burn rate till you started making money again. So nice little exercise. It's a quick, easy chart. You can get this down because I got that thing in the way. You can insert charts pretty easily. They have if you highlight the field and say recommended charts, they've got a lot of cool like multifunctional charts already programmed in Excel. I had just picked this one, but I changed it to a bar and a line. This is 2 lines. So Excel has gotten a lot better at providing functionality for people who aren't super users. And you can just, pick whatever helps you articulate your point. Maybe it's not a graph, maybe it's a pie chart or something else for a different purpose. So it's pretty easy to create graphs. And then, going back to our presentation here, you can change colors and add labels and add nice little lines and make this look really pretty and presentable once you have all that data and figure out what you're trying to show someone. So I think that leaves a little bit of time for questions, but just some kind of fun little Excel tricks and tips and just ways to tie in all that talk about drivers and assumptions and unit economics into kind of how that can help you start building a projection model. I typically, when I'm building a projection from scratch for a client or something that I'm doing, I'll usually start with the income statement because that's usually controlled by unit economics the best. And then you can generate that performance and then start looking at how that's going to look for the balance sheet. Your cash balance is going to be affected by the burn rate and the profit. Your receivables are going to be affected by revenue. That's going to affect how quickly you can pay back debt, what your liabilities are. Payables and accrued expenses tie in with your cost of goods and operating expenses. So I found that it's easiest to start with the income statement because that's the most unit economic driven statement of the 3. Do the cash flow statement last because changes in the other 2 directly affect the cash flow statement. So that's kind of another last little tidbit on building a model. So
Perfect. Well, I know the first question some people have, and thank you for again making that accessible and understandable. So appreciate that, Roger. Always enjoy the session. The first question's around the Excel spreadsheet. Is there a way to get that template? I think we've shared that in the past. Is that something that the participants can walk away with?
Yeah. I'll send that to you, Cameron. I just have to get off my remote desktop at home because I need to get back on the network to be able to email that out. So I'll send that out to you tomorrow so you can share with the group and they can start messing around with it.
Perfect. So that will be as part of follow-up. So yeah, Thor, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, Roger, I'm wondering, when you're building this model, where do you begin starting on looking at the projection ranges? Like it's a best estimate or it's a hopeful outlook or projection that you think will happen. How do we design for undershooting that or missing the mark? Or because I think in my experience, a lot of people are always looking for that. They say, well, we're going to get 10,000 units this year. Well, that's a hopeful 10,000 units. What if we only hit 5,000? What's our and in looking at that break even modeling, right? How do we have to go back and reassess the assumptions of the business model itself, the fundamental basis of the value proposition?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, in starting to build the model, there's often a lot of trial and error. I think in my first 2 sessions here, I actually had some of that trial and error. So I've dialed this in a little bit. So I kind of know the keystrokes and what we're doing, but it starts with when you're actually building the model, playing around with it, seeing what works. And then when you start adding in your assumptions, you'll have an idea of how many units you think you can sell. The idea is building the model so you don't have to change the model to adjust, the number of units, but you are going to run into potentially fundamental business changes. Let's say your, manufacturing, furniture, and you decide, hey, we've decided to do couches, but we also want to add, a bed line and a carpet line, and let's get into appliances. You might actually have to add additional revenue lines for different revenue streams. So, the nice thing about the models is they do have to be somewhat fluid. The goal is to not change them as much as possible, but as you do, change your business model, working through like the flow chart we just did with Starbucks, as you come up with ideas to insert in those flow charts, you might have to change that model. That could add additional costs. You might have to add lines or expenses for that. So the hope is that as you work through the model and you're analyzing scenarios, you don't have to keep changing the model. But if you do go through a fundamental change, excuse me, you might have to make some tweaks to the underlying model for that to make sense. Does that kind of answer the question? That was a roundabout way of answering it, I think.
I know it's kind of a hard question, but yeah, that gets at it, because I've done business modeling as well. You prove things on paper, and that's always, in my opinion, I think that's the most important part of this whole process, is proofing it on paper. But yeah.
And this exercise will help you with that. It's like, does this model or does this business model make sense? And once you start penciling it out, it may or may not. And you say, well, and as you think through your ideas, you may add stuff. So it's got to be flexible. The idea with the projection is, once you decide on what the assumptions are, what the business is, you should generate a model so you don't have to keep changing it just to tweak different scenarios. But if you do change your business completely, you might have to make some changes there.
Awesome. We have time for maybe one additional question. Okay, so we got Natalie. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much, Roger. That was great. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions on presenting these multiple scenarios during a pitch, since there is limited time. I was wondering if you have any advice on just talking about these numbers without having it go over investors' heads, because this is a lot of information too.
Yeah, I guess that depends on what you're including in the pitch. But if you have a assumptions table that's driving your projection model, you can highlight a few of the key lines. Like, in a couple instances in that presentation, I had an abbreviated income statement, for example, which shows enough detail that they'll see the revenue, the expenses, the profit, but maybe not the full detail within that. So summarizing key points, coupling that with assumptions, and then showing what that scenario might look like at 5,000 units, 10,000, and 15,000. You say, hey, here's what we're hoping to get, but if we only get 5,000 units, we're okay because of this. So showing some kind of summary with just the key facts would probably be the best way to do that. When I'm doing similar stuff, so when I'm taking a deal to credit at the bank, and I have a projection scenario, and I've got my customer's case, my adjusted bank case, and my downside case, I'll just show 3 tables with the same information right next to each other, just the key stuff that I know they're going to want to ask about, and so that they can actually see how each case changes on those exact same numbers.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at the 8 o'clock hour. I'm going to just do a quick wrap up, and first want to say thank you, Roger, for coming in and being a guest speaker again. Always appreciate and value our time together. So I know
thanks for
everyone's
having
walking
me.
away with some good knowledge and some tools that they can use in building their financial projections, as well as knowing the proper lingo for many of the terms. So I want to speak to some of the links that I shared in the chat briefly. So that first one, again, is the Soul Leadership Initiative. So if you're a student here trying to receive credit for that, definitely fill out that form. Brian and I will be leading the Certificate in Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So we'd love for you to sign up and join us for that 10-week-long program that will be launching in October. Additionally, there's a the 90-day lean stack. So as you've seen, we've used lean stack as a tool. That's a program that you can hop on there completely online. And the last few ones I'll run quick is Startup Stack Happy Hour. Next week, we'll be doing a panel discussion with some investors talking about seed stage capital. And then next week, also for the toolkit series, we'll have some investors on our panel. So we'll be back here for that. And then we got two last resources I want to share is a Mentor Sacramento Office Hour Sprint, where it's a basically speed dating for mentors. That will be on September 15th from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. A great opportunity to connect there. And then we'll also be running a social innovation series in October or the end of October, early November. So if you're trying to start a social venture, check out that program, 4 weeks long. And then lastly, you're always welcome to join us for 1 Million Cups, which is on Wednesdays from 9 to 10 a.m. So without further ado, we'll draw it to close. Thank you, Roger and Brian. And then thank you all for the questions and engagement in our breakout room. So we look forward to seeing you next week with our investor panel and be ready to come with some questions. And yeah, we look forward to engaging you then.
Thank you. Thanks, Roger.
all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.